In this video, we're going to talk about some details about writing our own classes. Our primary goal for this first video is going to be to understand the 4 visibility options that we can use for both data members or data fields and methods in our classes. We'll also start to explore the idea of the object class and how it's related to other Java classes. So let's turn our attention to visibility. Sometimes we've used visibility modifier special words in our code, like public, protected, or private. We haven't really talked about what those values mean. So for example, in our student class that we were writing last time, we created some data fields, and we used the modifier protected with those. And we've been creating methods all semester, and we usually use public in front of the methods that we're creating. So today we're going to talk about what those mean. Those are all special visibility modifiers. They control how the data fields or methods can be accessed from outside our class files. There's actually 4 levels of access. They're public, protected, package, and private. If you don't include one of the modifiers, Java uses package level as the access level default. So if you don't specifically write public or protected, that's what it's assuming you want to use. And so you might be wondering, like, what are the implications? The main implications are whether you can access that particular data field or method from outside the class. So if you were writing a main program or maybe had a completely separate project directory, would you be able to access that field? And this little chart here summarizes the access levels. So if something's public, as you might imagine, that means absolutely anybody can access it. If you're in the class itself, you can access it. If you're in the same package, if you're in a subclass of it, if you're anywhere on the same computer, you'd be able to access that particular field. On the other hand, if you use protected, it's pretty much the same. It's still accessible within the class, the package, and subclasses. It's not accessible to the world, so it's a little bit more restrictive. If you don't include any modifier, it's only accessible inside the class or the package that you're working on. So as long as you're in the same directory, you're good. But once you step outside the directory, you won't have access. And if you label something as private, it means it's only accessible within that class file. So we're going to look at some implications. We'll try some stuff out in IntelliJ so that we can see how the access changes based on the modifier. So first, let's talk about the least restrictive access level. Suppose we have a class like the student class that we were writing, and you assign a public modifier to a data field or a method. What you're saying is that anybody can access that in any way that they want to. So they could access it to retrieve the value that you have stored inside that data field. They can also change the value that's stored inside that data field. So if we had the last name field declared public in the student class, let's go over and make that change. We made last name public. Then in the main class, we'd be able to access that particular field. We'd be able to say something like, let me define a student, student 1, and then let me say student 1's last name is equal to Sarah. So in my main program, I'd be able to say things like, I'm going to make a student 3, so that I don't have to mess with the ones I've already created. Student type, student 3, didn't spell it right, equals new student type. And then I'd be able to say something like, student 3 dot last name equals Smith. And you notice that we have access to that. There's no squiggly lines or anything. Nothing's telling me I can't do that. And the reason I'm able to access that data field is because we declared it to be public. As a general rule of thumb, though, public visibility is really too permissive and should be avoided if you're creating a data field. It's often the perfect access level for methods, because generally when you're writing a method, think about all the methods that we have in our student class. We want to be able to access these methods like set first name or get GPA. We want to be able to access those from outside this particular file. We want to be able to call those from our main method. And so public access is the right level for the methods. But in general, when you're making things that are data fields, you want to have a more protected access level so that people can't just inadvertently change the values in your data fields. If you write all of the setter methods and all of the getter methods, then you're controlling what people have access to. You're not just leaving your class wide open for people to extract data from or change values to just at their whim. If we consider the most restrictive access level private, private access means that you can only access the field from inside the class itself. So let's try that out with our student class. Let's change the value of last name so it's private. So that's fine. It's not going to change anything about the student type file because inside the student type file, everything's accessible. It's only from outside that now you'll see that the last name is not accessible. It tells us last name has private access in student type. That means we can't access it directly. It doesn't mean that we can't do anything with the last name. It just forces us to use our modifier methods like the set last name. So we're still able to modify the last name, just now we're doing it in a controlled way. We're not able to just do it at will. So that means if you had any kind of error checking or something built into your method, you're forcing somebody to use that error checking that's part of your method rather than just kind of circumventing it by making changes to the data values themselves. So if we try to compile, it's going to give us an error saying the last name's not accessible. We didn't even have to compile. We just saw that just by typing it in, it tells us that it's not accessible, so it won't compile. The visibility level that's a little more restrictive, like private, is usually the appropriate level that you want to use for data fields. It's usually too restrictive for methods because making them private means you won't be able to call them from outside your class. If you take a course in object-oriented design later on in the computer science major, you'll learn about how to make really good decisions about visibility. In 220, we're not going to get real sophisticated, so we're going to use this rule of thumb. You can use this for all of the projects we're going to make this semester. All of the methods that you write should be declared with public visibility so that we can access them outside the class. All of the data fields that you create should be declared with private visibility so they're not accessible. If this topic is really interesting to you and you want to get more information about it, your notes have info about the Java tutorials. If you Google Oracle Java tutorials, those are the definitive Java tutorials that are written by the folks who own Java, Oracle. And they have lots of different tutorials on different topics. They have a lot on object-oriented design. And if you read their tutorials, they suggest that you use the most restrictive access level for a particular data member that makes sense. So use private unless you have a good reason not to. And definitely avoid public fields unless you're using a named constant. So in general, you want to try to make data fields private, but again, public is a good accessibility level for methods.